So after the most recent character duels rotation update, I think the best free decks in the format in terms of maxed out graded decks, I'm not talking about grade 0 decks, those are a different tier list, but what I think are the best free decks if you max out on grades are Photon, Dark Magician, and Heroes, and today we're talking about Heroes. In fact, I think Heroes are actually better than Dark Magician, purely because of the fact that everybody is playing backward removal, and that completely just counters Dark Magician if you draw it, but Heroes is a bit more harder to counter, and we're going to talk about what the deck actually does and why it's so good. And first of all, a few things have changed in terms of what heroes are actually doing because when it first released in the beginning of Character Duels, the deck is not that good. But the biggest change that actually made it actually a lot better than it was other than the fact that the two worst matchups, which is Jack and Yuma, are now not a thing because those just remove the fusion monster without destroying. Other than that, the biggest change that the deck had was the addition of Crosskeeper, which is not in the grade 0 version of the deck, which means that the grade 0 version of the deck is going to be a lot weaker just because you don't have Crosskeeper in your deck, but this card does so much for the deck, and it makes the deck so much better than the version without it. So this card is used if you played the game during, Dragonic Contact format. This is just basically draw 2, and it is also really, really good in character duels as well. So there is another effect that this card can do that revives a monster, but that is not very relevant. That only comes up if you have it in your hand and you want to just put it in the graveyard. But the relevant effect is if you use it as a part of Neo's fusion to fusion summon Brave Neos, you get to immediately trigger the effect, and then you get to draw 2 cards and then put back a card back to your deck. And you don't even need to use it as specifically a material for Neo's fusion. As long as this card is in your graveyard and then you fusion summon, you can trigger this effect. But the most usual way that you're gonna trigger the effect is with Neo's fusion using this card as material. So drawing 2 cards allows this deck to do a lot of things, and you can basically build your deck around having a lot of generic staples, like as you can see, we're playing 3 Book of Moons, 2 Raigeki Breaks, and 2 Cosmic Cyclones, and you can use the effect of Crosskeeper to draw 2 cards in a 20 card deck, and that is a really, really high chance of you drawing into these generic staples, especially after you use Neo's Fusion and you send 2 materials from your deck. You already deck thin yourselves for 2 additional cards before you do the draw 2. So it's really likely that you draw these non-engines, and then those are going to be the ways that you are going to counter the other decks in the metagame. And because of the skill allows you to reveal a Neos monster to put it back to the deck and then add Neos Fusion to your hand. You basically have 9 starters in your 20 card deck. So 3 Neos Alias, 3 normal Neos, and 3 Neos Fusion. So the 2 Neos monsters are actually going to be better starters than Neos Fusion itself, because when you use it with the skill gives you additional monsters in your graveyard, which boosts the monsters, boosts your Brave Neos attack. So it goes above 3000, and that is going to be relevant if you play against a deck like Blue Eyes. But we still want 3 copies of Neos Fusion because you need all 3 copies for follow-up, otherwise your deck is not going to be good in the grind game. And 9 starters in a 20 card deck is a really good amount of starters, so you can basically fill the rest of your deck with the bricks, like Grand Mole. Grand Mole is technically not really a brick because if you draw it, you can just normal summon it, and then it's a pretty good removal. But Crosskeeper is pretty much a brick, Merkle Contact is a brick, but the rest of the deck can be completely just generic staples. So we're gonna play Cosmic Cyclone instead of MST because Cosmic Cyclone is better against specifically Dark Magician, and also slightly better against Cyber Dragons as well, because if you banish the trap card, it doesn't trigger the graveyard effect. But the biggest matchup problem of this deck is going to be Dark Magician, because not only does the Dark Magical Circle banish your fusion monster, the navigation in your graveyard, in their graveyard, also negates your fusion spell. and your whole game plan revolves around resolving your fusion spell. So they just have a card in their deck that completely just negates your win condition. So if they go first, you really need a good amount of cards in your deck to be able to beat that setup. So we're playing Cosmic Cyclone, and even if we banish something like a navigation, it will stop it from ending up in the graveyard, and then it will not be something that we have to worry about, negating our follow-up in our next turn. And the life points don't really matter too much, so it's fine. And Raigeki Break is also good, not only because it is part of the Grade 0 deck, it's also just a removal for anything. So if you play against Dark Magician, you can use it to pop back row. If you use it against monster-heavy combo deck, you can pop the monsters, and it is really flexible. And the discard cost isn't really that big of a deal most of the time, because if you have bricks in your hand, like if you already shuffled a Neos back to the deck and then you have a second one in your hand, you can discard the second one because it doesn't really do anything in your hand. Or if you have a Crosskeeper, for example, you can also just send that to the graveyard. Or if you play against Dark Magician and you have like a Book of Moon isn't really that good against Dark Magician, so you can just leave it in your hand and then discard it with Raigeki Break. So it's a really flexible card that you can play in this deck, and as a bonus, it's also in the Grade 0 version of the deck, so it doesn't really require any grades to put this card in. So yeah, that's pretty much the deck. Let's have a look at some replays now. Okay, in our first replay, we're playing against Yami Yugi, and we're going first. So the going first game plan of this deck is basically just to activate Neos Fusion, and then set back row. And now we have a Neos in our hand, which means we do have access to Neos Fusion, so we'll fire it off immediately. We're gonna make a Neos Fusion, and the good thing about this deck is that the quote-unquote combos are really difficult to stop, because, like, a Book of Moon, for example, won't do anything against our deck, because all we do is just activate a fusion spell and summon a fusion monster. Even if it gets flipped face down, we still get the draw 2 from Crosskeeper, so that's why this deck is so good, other than the fact that you just get to play so many non-engines. So our opponent opens a navigation, which is really annoying, because if they don't open navigation, we basically just win the game on the spot, but because they did, we have to play the game. We're gonna flip our opponent's Dark Magician face down before we activate the Neos Fusion, so that we don't get negated by the navigation. Navigation is really annoying, even if they go second. And they're gonna prevent us from beating over their Dark Magician with their Book of Moon. Book of Moon isn't really that big of a problem in this matchup, but it's still annoying that we can't get rid of his Dark Magician, which means he is able to contest our first spell card activation with the navigation in his graveyard. So we're gonna chain Raigeki Break to his navigation. It's pretty important that you do this, and you don't wait for them to summon the Dark Magicians first and then use Raigeki Break in response to the Circle Banish. And that's because of the quick play spell that they have. They have I forgot the name of the quick play spell, the one that Dark Magic Expanded, I think is what it's called. So that card has 3 effects, depending on the amount of Dark Magicians that they have in the field or graveyard. And the relevant effect is that the second effect, if they have 2 or more Dark Magicians, it stops their back row from being destroyed by card effects. So if you wait for them to summon the 2 Dark Magicians and then you try to Raigeki Break their circle and then they chain the expanded, they will stop you from popping their circle, and that's really, really bad. You just wasted a Raigeki Break, you wasted a discard, and you did nothing. So, really important thing that you have to know about if you play this format. So we're gonna get rid of the circle, and then we're just gonna beat over his monsters. One thing that we have over Dark Magician is that our attacks are just higher than 2500, which means they are gonna have to waste resources to get rid of our stuff, and we can just beat over their monsters by battle. We can get rid of his final monster with the Grand Mole Bounce, and we can just attack for game. Okay, in our second replay, we're also playing against another Dark Magician. I just want to show you a more difficult matchup. There's no reason for me to show you a game against like Blackwing or Red Eyes and me just activating Book of Moon and winning the game on the spot. So we're gonna have another game against Dark Magician. This time we are also going first, but they also open navigation because Dark Magician players are just built different, I guess. We're gonna leave the Book of Moon in our hand, as I talked about in the deck profile. This card is not really good against Dark Magician, so we're gonna have it in our hand as discard, and then we're gonna keep the Grand Mole if we could to be able to get rid of any of his high attack monsters. So we're gonna use Cosmic Cyclone to get rid of his circle to stop the search and also stop him from having the circle on the field. He's gonna activate the navigation. We're gonna get rid of his Xyz monster, and now we're gonna put him in a really bad position. We don't unfortunately have a second copy of News Fusion, so we cannot go for lethal this turn. And at least we can search a News Fusion after we attack with the Brave Nears for follow-up, but our opponent is still going to be able to play, which is really bad because they do have a navigation in the graveyard. So as long as they have a Dark Magician on the field, we are going to be in a rough position just because they can negate our fusion spells. So they kind of have a misplay here. I think they should use navigation in draw phase so that on my main phase, they can use the navigation in their graveyard to negate my fusion spells, but they waited for the battle phase for some reason, so that's good for us. They're gonna try to circle to banish, and we don't really have a way to stop that, but at this point, we already have more than one Brave Neos, so one single banish is not going to be enough. And he's gonna go Offerings to the Doomed to pop the Grand Mole to stop us from going for lethal this turn. And that does work, but it also stops him from having a draw in a draw phase, so we're still ahead. And we now have 2 more fusion spells, but before we can fire them, we have to bait out the navigations first. So we're gonna use the Book of Moon to force the first one out, and navigation is, whatever reason, is not once per turn, so we have to bait out the second one as well with the News Fusion that he knows that we have. And then now we can safely activate the Merkle Contact. This time we're not gonna make Brave Nears, we can instead make Storm Nears, and threaten to blow his entire back row away, but he does still have one last trick up his sleeve. It is his 3rd Magician's Navigation, and that allows him to banish Storm Nears, but we still have enough beaters on our field to beat over his monsters, and he's now out of navigations, which means he cannot play the game, so he's just gonna scoop. So yeah, I'll probably make a character duel tier list for both graded decks and like grade 0 decks later, and tell me what you think. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.